my practice is centered primarily around helping people keep more of their money, reduce taxes, reduce risk and costs, and so they can keep more and deploy into things that they own and control.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for joining another episode of the Freedom Point. I'm your host, Jeremy Dyer. We're very glad you're with us today. I have another amazing guest with me today, Tom Suvansri. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving us our listening audience some time this morning. Just want to read a quick little bio on Tom here before we get started. After working in the pharmaceutical industry for 20 plus years, Tom founded Perennial Pride, which allowed him to leave his corporate job and pursue his passion and purpose. The mainstream financial advice keeps control of most Americans' wealth and puts family at higher risk than necessary. And Tom teaches the principles and strategies that help families take ownership of their financial lives. Tom, the day that we're recording this podcast today, the stock market is in flux. We hit a brand new record late last week. Monday morning, we open up and the markets are down. The Wall Street is very much a roller coaster. So I know most of our listening audience would really love to unpack a little bit more about some of the things that you teach and the principles and the strategies that you suggest to your investor clients on why maybe Wall Street isn't the only answer for building generational wealth. That said, can you please help us unpack a little bit more about your own journey and what you're primarily focused on today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I consider, as you mentioned in the bio, I'm kind of like a refugee from the corporate America world. I feel like for one of the first times in my life, like so free and sort of outside the cage, if you will, of the zoo. I think it's so easy to get trapped in there. But yeah, a lot of my journey, and I started this practice years ago, and it was just something I fell into. It wasn't something I was initially was focused on. I was in I grew up as a science guy. My dad was a doctor. I was, trained around science and chemistry and biology. And it's really served me well in my transition to the financial world because it's about systems and understanding how things work together, right? We could get so enamored in the financial world on a specific product or even a specific strategy. But the reality is our financial world is much more complicated and connected, right? And this is what I learned over the course of the years, watching and listening to other people. I'm sure folks within your sort of environment and listening to this podcast, or like especially real estate, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and all the different other areas that people get into finances. And I just started learning that because I never was taught any of this stuff growing up. It was get a job, do your 401k. The stock market's the only place to be. And it's just was frustrating to me because I just felt like I didn't have any control over it. So unfortunately, a lot of the things happen in life because you see bad things happen to yourself or your family. And it started with my family. My parents were immigrants from Thailand, and my father was a doctor, ran a successful practice, but just like a lot of physicians know, they know medicine, but they don't know finances. Well, neither did he. And unfortunately, it sort of landed in a world where he owed like hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes. He put his money in investments he had no business getting into and basically went bankrupt. And it caused me to sort of reflect on saying, you know what, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to control and own our finances. And I just started exploring. And it just sort of landed in the world of understanding that a lot of the financial institutions that exist today are there to control it, our wealth. whether it's Wall Street, banks, even insurance companies. They're all trying to get a piece of our money, right? And even our tax authorities. So this is my practice is centered primarily around helping people keep more of their money, reduce taxes, reduce risk and costs, and so they can keep more and deploy into things that they own and control, like real estate, businesses. That's where I'd rather you invest in things that you have more ownership on, because to me, that reduces risk tremendously. When you know what you're investing in, it to me it almost eliminates it. And so we just try to find ways to keep more money in people's hands so they can deploy most of it and then think about generational wealth. So that's where my practice primarily sits.
Yeah, Tom, and this is remarkable. I really appreciate you unpacking that for our audience. So, it really kind of begs the question, because I know there's a lot of financial advisor firms out there. I mean, there's virtually one on every street corner. So, my question for you is, how does Perennial Pride differ from traditional financial advisory firms?
Yeah, because a lot of it we start we're very holistic in the way that we help our clients, and because we are trying to have people play both offense and defense, and so because of the so segmented world we live in with finances, it's hard for people to piece that together. So one of the areas that I am just personally passionate about is defensive side of the ball. Right, we're trying to protect wealth, but we also know we have to play offense. So that's why I have built around me and my practice is I have access to a lot of experts around the country that can help in different areas around advanced tax planning, right? Unique ways to build wealth outside of just Wall Street, risk mitigation, legal services, and even business advisory, because people who are successful, whether business owners or high net worth, there's a lot of complicated factors into it. But what I do know is I can't know it all. And I
Mhm.
need a great team around me to bring in to help my clients to look at it in aggregate and how those things work together. Because virtually everything is going to have an impact somewhere else in your financial world. I need the team around me to bring to help solve problems, bigger problems for my clients, not just sell them one solution. And so that's the way we're positioned, because we know it's so difficult and complicated to try to piece it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say are some of the kind of maybe the common misconceptions that you hear from investors, about financial planning that you aim to correct?
Yeah, I think, there's so much emphasis on a specific investment, right? The rate of return. You get so enamored about that, interest rates. In reality, I think where I'm seeing most clients is that their financial foundations have cracks all over the place. I know you're heavily into real estate. Imagine your house has cracks and leaks all over the place, right? You're trying to build this mansion on top of it and expand it. That is a potential house of cards ready to fall. And so most are not really focused on identifying where money is leaking from their lives in a whole host of ways. And so they're trying to save and invest a smaller portion. What if you can recapture massive interest, taxes, fees, all these things that you can collapse back into your world that you can control, and then start deploying the things that you can control, right? So that's where I think a lot of the things are missed, because there's so much wealth being sort of siphoned away from us. And sometimes we don't even know it's happening, right? It's sometimes invisible. And so that's where we help them identify that so they can capture that back for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to give you a little bit of a softball question here, if you don't mind. And that is, many that listen to my podcast know that I'm not super enamored with the advice that I've been personally given from my own financial advisor over the course of the last, 2.5 decades, that I've been personally investing. So this question really is centered around that. And the question is, how does mainstream financial advice mislead or put families at a higher risk according to your own experience?
I think because of the way, if you step back from it and think broadly around what all the financial institutions, they play by a different set of rules than us as individuals and business owners. And so we just have to recognize that what they're trying to do is they play by four very basic rules. And hopefully is helpful, is they want our money constantly, right? They want to extract it and use it, right, to deploy. And when they're holding it, right, then they want us to give it to them periodically as much as possible, monthly even, if you ever recognize that. And they want to hold it for long, long periods of time. And then when we want to, get our money back, they want to drip it to us because they want to control it even for generations. And so we just have to recognize the game they're trying to play and say, okay, how could we actually do that more for ourselves and reverse it? Right? How can we keep more control of our wealth over time as opposed to giving it away? And so that's why we get educated on how do banks operate, right? Even something as basic as where you're storing your money, right? Most people don't feel like they get much out of storing wealth in a bank, but we still do it, right? Because we don't have any alternatives, right? Or if we have to pay taxes, what are ways that we can kind of work around that and be partners with the IRS as opposed to enemies, right? So these are just different ways that I think financial institutions play on on awareness of what's happening, and then they're controlling more of our wealth and basically using our money to make money, right? So why can't we apply those same concepts?
So I wrote down, I know you mentioned there's four different ways that institutional financial institutions use. One of them is control, right? Would you mind helping unpack what the remaining three were, or did I mishear you?
Yeah, it's all a form of control. It's one where they want us to constantly just give our money to them because
Sure.
they know better, right? So they know things better than us. It's so complicated, so we just keep on feeding them money. And so take for instance the 401k. That was set up not to actually be a retirement vehicle back in the 80s. It was meant to reduce at the time tax rates were the highest tax rates were 80% or so for the highest income. That was all it was meant to do, but it's now become the way that we save for retirement because we keep on giving our money into a system that they can control, and then it locks it up for long periods of time. And then when they want to get it, we have to get taxed on that, so we drip it out, right? It's a model that they've used to almost like without us thinking about it, continue to just feed money into the system that they control and profit from. While we pay all the fees over the course of the length of it, and then we have to pay tax on it on top of it. So it's just a method. It's and I don't say these are bad people. They just found a very good way to almost people blindly feed into it without ever thinking about it, right? So what I like to teach with people is just to think about what's happening, and then you're going to identify, hey, there's probably some different ways to go about doing it once you realize what's happening.
Sure. So let's talk to that higher net worth individual that for the last 2+ decades, they've been a good steward of their resources. They've maxed out their 401k plan for the last, 25 consecutive years. They're largely debt free, meaning they own their home outright. Any additional toys they have, such as RVs or boats, are fully paid off, right? But they've got some additional cash sitting on the sidelines, and they've struck out 9 out of 10 times trying to find the next Facebook, Tesla, Amazon stock, right? What would you tell that individual in terms of where they should consider deploying some of that excess dry powder?
Yeah, and this is where I always and I get asked this often enough. Where do I invest? And part of my initial response is, what do you actually know, and what is the purpose of the dollars, right? Because there's so many different types of strategies, investments to deploy money into. But what I always try to encourage people to think about is what is it that you actually know about, right, or understand and want to learn about, and spend time learning about them first before you go invest, right? Because just because what I invest in, whether it's real estate, oil and gas, or even ATMs, for instance, right? You got to understand what you're getting into. Because to me, if you're just kind of just throw money, then it's more speculative. And we have places where you want to speculate, but I think initially is trying to understand what are you actually interested in learning about or know about, and then what are things that and what's the purpose of those dollars? Like, what are you going to use them for, short term, long term? And oftentimes, I don't think a lot of people think about it, right, all that often, right? Because money, in my mind, is just a tool to help us live our best life, but you got to understand what you're using it for. And so it's hard to know exactly what investment is right for somebody until they understand that themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also the element of, being diversified into maybe different, types of investments if you're certainly seeking, an alternative investment
Mm.
strategy. But as you probably know, and I'm sure you coach your clients on, our appetite for our risk exposure, changes, over the course of our lives. My sensitivity to risk was a lot different in my 20s, than it
Right.
is in my 40s, and it will certainly be different, obviously in my 50s. So that needle's constantly moving, over the course of our lives, and so that's why it's important to have somebody that trust, to provide you with wise counsel and good, help you be a good steward of your money, while at the same time, continuing to stay educated and learn, what's happening really in the alternative investment space. So really, really appreciate you sharing that, Tom. I'd like to speak now specifically to that investor that, really feels trapped in their corporate jobs. Okay. It's that investor that's, worked for the same employer maybe for the last, 20 plus years, or they've really depended, solely on, that active form of income, by way of a W-2. What advice would you give to that individual who, is feeling trapped in their corporate job and they want to pursue a more fulfilling, career path?
Yeah, and this is what I went through this myself, and it requires some inertia, right? Because we have to start learning some things, getting exposed to things, and unfortunately, I've come across enough people that are just not open minded about learning these things too. So obviously, for your sort of case here, they're already interested. So part of it is exploring, right? Because there's a lot of avenues that I started exploring for myself. I realized a lot of the wealthier folks were either real estate owners or business owners, right? In some shape or capacity. And so that's the road that I took to learn more about how I could do that to generate some other passive income. And as I started exploring it more, I found it much more, a lot of other different ways to generate income, right? Because I knew that is what I needed to replace my W-2 income. So it's just changing the thought because, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, most people are taught to just put money in to use someday, 59 and a half, 60, or some arbitrary age of retirement. Well, the wealthier know that cash flow is actually even in my mind even more valuable than just your net worth, right? Because you need that to live and breathe. So how are you investing in assets that aren't going to bring you income later, but now, right? In some capacity, whether private lending, real estate, investing in someone's business. Like there's so many different options, but you got to learn like where is a good fit for you. And to your point, like there's a risk tolerance to it, right? Or amount of energy you want to put into it. And that's why I love what you guys do around being able to help people who just want to do passively, right? Invest in things and assets like real estate and benefit from that. But you got to sort of explore that. What's a good fit for you, right? I talked to my brother. He would never get into 90% of the things that I invest in, right?
Yeah.
It's just not it's not in his DNA or desire. And so it really is important to kind of get a good fit because I know over my history and learning, like when I get into things just, haphazardly, I sort of realize I should never jump, right? Because you get that shiny ball syndrome and rates return and tax advantages. But if you don't know anything about it, you shouldn't get invested in it. You shouldn't invest,
Yeah.
right? Until you have a good feel for it.
Yeah, I'm a certainly a big champion of education and making sure that people fully understand, the investment strategy that they have an opportunity to get into and all the different intricacies that go, around, that type of an investment or investment strategy. One term that gets kind of thrown around on our podcast periodically, very lightly, but it's never really been unpacked or defined by any guest before, and that is this concept of infinite banking. Would you
Mm.
mind helping our listening audience understand a little bit more about what infinite banking is?
Yeah, and I'll start with saying what it's not, right? Which is always good. It's not an investment. That is absolutely the last thing your audience probably has heard. Dave Ramsey's always poo-pooing this. It's like infant banking and whole life insurance. It's like the worst place to put money. It's a worst investment. Well, it's not an investment. What it really is a process and even a lifestyle, right? To manage your cash flow, right? It's a cash management system. That's all really it is. And so for most people, when they think about cash management or storage, is putting money in banks, right? And it's the flow of money. And so when we have to spend things on for an investment or even lifestyle, we have to finance that. And we finance everything, whether we pay cash or we borrow someone else's money to do it. We still need capital. So this is just a process to help control the flow of money and ensure that it benefits us more than sort of the banking institutions. And so that's what infinite banking really is all about. The tool itself is a specially designed whole life insurance policy. It's been around for a while, right? This isn't new. It just becomes a much more versatile and efficient tool to use to implement the infinite banking concept, right? And so for folks who are in real estate, they get it. They understand the use of leverage, right? More than the normal folks. And that's all this really is. So it's just putting that into a process and system to do it, essentially.
No, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. So, my next kind of question for you, Tom, is maybe a personal question, maybe a professional question, and that is, what's the rest? Do you have any specific goals for the rest of 2024 that you'd like to check off your bucket list, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, as I move forward here, I am recognizing. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier. I was always big into sports, and the team aspect of my life has become even bigger, right? Because I'm starting to sort of build my practice in a way after leaving my corporate job and trying to find the right people that to build this with, right? Because it's hard to do these things individually, and I know the impact is going to be much lower trying to do it all myself. So I'm in the midst of sort of formulating a couple strategic partnerships with different firms, and while still remaining independent, so I still can add more value to my clients and give them options to get into other things that I'm not an expert in or licensed even to help with. And so I'm starting to build those partnerships over this year, whether it's tax sort of experts or estate planners, to really round out sort of aspects of my sort of family office environment, like that I'm building. And so that's what I'm most excited about, because I know we're trying to solve bigger problems, and I need other people. I
Yeah,
cannot
that's
do it
right.
myself.
That's right. It's definitely a team sport. Certainly, that's the true, in investing. What would maybe be one or two different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, I have my own sort of. I have a podcast I started about a year and a half ago called the Perennial Pride Podcast. Whole host of things, from real estate to tax strategies, unique things, to alternative sort of investments. So I love bringing guests on and share that information for people to learn. Certainly, my website, perennialpride.com, whole host of resources and information I've been sharing, just things that I've just been fortunate enough to gather and learn myself, and I'm just sharing as much there. So definitely a great place for folks to maybe contact me there and learn more about my practice.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, we'll put those links in the show note for this episode. And Tom, really appreciate you joining us on the show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation and look forward to further ones in the future.
Yeah, sounds good. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.